Welcome to the Korea Society's live webcast. I'm Jayo, Senior Director of Arts and Culture. An epic story of love, war, and redemption set against the backdrop of the Korean independence movement, Beasts of a Little Land follows the intertwined fates of a number of fascinating characters, including a young girl sold by her family to a courtesan school and a penniless son of a hunter. From the perfumed chambers of a courtesan school in Pyongyang to the glamorous cafes of modernizing Seoul to the boreal forests of Manchuria where battles rage, Juhea Kim's unforgettable characters forge their own destinies as they wager their nations. Immersive and elegantly written in this novel, friends become enemies, enemies become saviors, heroes are persecuted, and beasts take many different shapes. We are thrilled to welcome Juhea Kim to the Korea Society. Juhea was born in Incheon, Korea and moved to Portland, Oregon at age 9. Her writing has been published in Granta and Catapult, among many others. And she's also the founder and editor of Peaceful Dumpling, an online magazine covering sustainable lifestyle and ecological literature. Juhea earned her BA in Art and Archaeology from Princeton University, and she now lives in Portland, Oregon, from where she joins us tonight. Beasts of a Little Land is her first novel. Welcome to the Korea Society, Juhea.
Thank you for such a warm welcome. I'm so happy to be here, Jay.
A quick reminder to our viewers, you can send in your questions to Juhea by emailing artsandculture@koreasociety.org or by tweeting at Korea Society Art. So happy publishing day to Juhea. This is today your first novel, Beasts of Little Land came out. So first of all, tell us a little bit about the fabulous novel, just what it is about, who's in it.
So Beasts of a Little Land is an epic story of love, war, and redemption that begins in 1917. And it opens with a scene in the mountains, snowy mountains of Pyongyang. And we meet a famished hunter there who is lost in the woods. And he is actually saved by a Japanese officer. And from that chance encounter unfolds a saga spanning half a century and 2 generations of characters whose fates are completely intertwined. And the concept behind it is inyan, which many of you in the audience who are Korean are very familiar. Inyan can be thought of as a human connection that's preordained. It can be thought of as a kind of destiny between people. And of course, there is that well-known proverb saying, even brushing one's coat, hem of one's coats on the streets is inyan. That means nothing is chance, that every encounter was meant to be there. So these characters, about a dozen major and minor characters, their lives just entwine over time and impact each other's destinies in ways that they both recognize and don't recognize.
That's a great way to describe it. So where did you get the idea for the plot of this book? I should first of all say that it is a historical novel because it's set in the past and you deal with some very important historical events, although it is a fiction. And the novel's timeline starts in 1917 and ends in 1965, but much of it is set in the first half of the 20th century during the Japanese occupation of Korea. So where did you first get the idea to write a novel about that period?
So my mother, her father, so my maternal grandfather passed away, unfortunately, before I was born. But my mother used to tell me stories about him. And he was not a very well-educated man. And as a matter of fact, before he passed away, he made his living mostly as a hard laborer and a bricklayer and subsistence farmer. So my mother was the first in her family to go to college, and she was the youngest. And my grandfather got about a few years of formal schooling, and he dropped out of school at around age 10. But he would tell my mom and her siblings these very strange stories, such as him driving around Shanghai in the 1940s and noticing that the roads are paved and the lanes are divided by bronze rivets. And that was something that really impressed my mom. She didn't know why her father might have been driving around at that time, and he's not very educated. It's not like he's there on business. He would also tell stories of him traveling very far away and having to walk hundreds of kilometers in a matter of like a day just to see his infant son. And we didn't understand why he was so far away, or why was he traveling so much in secret. And again, it didn't really have anything to do with his occupation. So between these stories, my mom and her siblings sort of figured out that he likely worked as a messenger for the independence movement. Probably not something that will get recorded in history. We all know about the important ones, but there were so many people who had unrecorded parts in this time period during the independence movement. And it's actually a very fascinating story because his older brother was a sunsa.
Oh.
That is a Korean word for a police officer,
right,
at that time, working
right,
with the Japanese.
With the Japanese, yes.
And his younger brother was a general right underneath President Park Chung-hee. So his name is actually written in history books because he was one of the generals who ascended to power when President Park Chung-hee also did. They were all in the military academy together. And it appears that that great uncle, eventually told President Park to give up power, and then he was banished, but he was still extremely powerful and wealthy, like even after that sort of political fallout. So even in this small family, there was this incredible division of ideology and how they chose to live their lives. And I was just blown away by that hidden part of history that really feels just like my personal story. So it felt like something that I was really born to write. I never really felt like I'm writing from so far away. It just felt like it was written in my DNA. That's how the story came to be. Of course, all the characters are very fictionalized. There's nothing that you will be able to say this character is directly related to such and such characters. But when I look back, I can definitely feel who inspired what element.
Absolutely. And that is a fascinating story. And I mean, in a sense, that is the story of so many Korean families, isn't it? So many differences within one family and the different lives they led. So still, I'm sure, so it sounds like you are pretty familiar with that period, or at least, you've been hearing about it because you came to the States when you're fairly young. And I'm sure you did not learn about this at your local high school per se. So when you decided was there any moment, by the way, when you decided that this is the first novel I'm going to write, or was it sort of a very slow evolving process for you?
Jay, it was not a very slow evolving process. I'll tell you exactly how it happened. So I started working with my agent, Jody Khan, in November 2015, almost exactly 6 years ago. And up until then, I hadn't given myself permission to consider myself even a talent of any kind. But I convinced Jody to take me on as a client. I had sent her a bunch of short stories I'd written at her request. And she was like, this is pretty good. Fine, I'll represent you. And I was like, yes, I'm going to publish a collection of short stories and call myself an author now. And she told me, actually, hold that, because we really need you to write a novel. Short stories don't sell. But I would love to work with you because you're talented, but give me something that I can actually sell. So I was really devastated. And I went running, and one day I went running in the snow in Fort Tryon Park in Inwood neighborhood in Manhattan.
Mm-hmm.
And if you know that neighborhood, it's not a wealthy neighborhood. I was in a little sublet room, and my new agent just told me I can't, sell anything yet. And so I was really upset. But then while running in the snow during a blizzard, I got this scene in my head of what eventually became the prologue. And I also got very quickly while running a much later scene, which Jay, you might have already read, of two lovers. After many years being apart, they have a tearful reunion. And that one of the parties is the independence fighter. So okay, and yeah, so some of these very penultimate scenes came to my mind while I was running. And so thinking about connecting those anchor scenes, that took a little bit of time, but certainly the main plot points came like very whole.
Mm. Writing a historical novel is a very particular thing. Were your short stories also like sort of set in the past, or did this just happen?
I will say my short stories are very different than this one novel. And, I don't have a particular thing where I am like, I only write about the past, or I only write speculative, I only write contemporary. All of these things I have written, but if I can say that there is something that I really prize and value in any format that I write, it's poignancy. And I find that to be a very Korean thing in terms of literary value. I was very influenced by the novelist and critic Lee Mun-yeol, and who, I have a whole collection of his collected anthologies, which he's very well known for in Korea. And he wrote that the greatest value literature can have in our lives is poignancy. And that really rang true for me. This is definitely not the au courant idea in American literature now. I will say that. This is almost very old-fashioned, but this is also the predominant idea in world literature, I believe. I do tend to read a lot of international literature, probably because that fits my sensibility as an artist. So whether it's short stories set in modern day New York, which was my debut, or my debut novel, which is set in 100 years ago in Korea, I definitely think about, what do I want the readers to leave with? Like, what feeling am I trying to give them? What sort of life-affirming qualities will this have? And that's what I always drive towards when I write.
That makes sense. But your book is also filled with a lot of realistic, lifelike details, like the hunting scene in the beginning, the gorgeous costumes and jewelries that you described the courtesans wear, but also the very devastating poverty and suffering that people go through during the wartime. So what was your research like when you decided to pursue this novel? What kind of things you did to learn more, about the details of the life at the time?
So I read a lot of history books and also literature from that time, and some of the music that we still have. I mean, you can even find that on Google and YouTube.
It's true.
Listen to Sai Channi. It's a very famous song from that era. It tells a story. It was written and sung by a very well-educated young opera singer, a young soprano who studied in Japan, but evidently, or so the lore goes, she wasn't able to consummate her love for a married man, so they both jumped off a ship and died. But her record became this immense hit, like sold like 10,000 or 100,000, like wildly, I think it was 100,000 records, wildly popular. That kind of, you can listen to that, and that becomes a song that I have in mind while writing. Like this is probably something that Jade or Lotus might have sang at a banquet, or like a benefit concert. Details like the benefit concert that they throw for the rickshaw drivers' children, those things actually happened. Like the parade of courtesans where they advertise restaurants, those kinds of things actually did happen. If you read history books or contemporary short stories from that time, you can really see that. And that also helped me write about courtesans in a much more open-minded way. I think courtesans have a bad reputation in Korea and also in America, but I think it's self-harming because in a sense it's a kind of a natural cultural legacy that we have, and we don't have to be ashamed of it. By that I mean, if you think about Lady of the Camellias or La Traviata, it's an opera and / book / ballet inspired by a real life European courtesan named Marie Duplessis. And it's turned into like some of the most revered opera ballet book in Western culture. Nobody says that that's shameful, that's lascivious. But then if it's a Korean courtesan, why are we ashamed of it? Why does it suddenly seem overly sensuous? It's not. Courtesans were actually a vital part of that culture. They were very important to the intellectual and artistic life during that time. And of course, yes, they did have that social role, but I don't think that should diminish their great freedom that they had as women, like very ahead of their time. So I wanted to show that side as well.
Well, also, I mean, when you're writing about historical novel, in a sense, they were the only working. I don't want to impose our 21st, sensibility, obviously, but they are the working woman, right? I mean, in the literal sense, they are the only woman who kind of worked outside of the traditional boundaries, which poses, a lot of interesting questions. And I don't want to give anything away about your book, but I did want to ask you about that relationship between the male characters and female characters in your book, because a lot of the female characters are courtesans. And I mean, I guess it's inevitable too, but I also was a little bit surprised of how you described the relationships. And I'm not saying that in a negative way at all. And especially it was your description of the male attitudes towards the woman and what they think of them, even when they are impassionately in love with them and, they adore them. Sometimes it infuriated me, but also it seemed very realistic, what you were describing, how these men felt about the women there are, who many of them claim to be the love of their lives, yet their attitudes seems to be, it's very complicated attitude. And I don't want to make like a sweeping, statement like you're, commenting on or anything like that. But can you tell us a little bit about the relationship? It's because the female characters are courtesans, but that very complicated male-female dynamic that you show in the novel.
The most important thing that informed me when I was writing about the male-female dynamic is really male-female dynamic universally at any time in any culture. That's what I was really inspired by, because actually while I was doing research and reading short stories from that era to kind of get a feel for what were people thinking about, what were they doing? And honestly, even though they had all these war and revolution and poverty raging around them, what they were actually thinking about was, does this person like me? Do they still think I'm hot? I want to be impressive in front of my friends. Oh, I got all this schooling, but I can't find a job. It's exactly the same as what we mostly deal with. So I knew that if I wanted to tell a true story, about them as human beings, all I needed to do was actually focus on what people want. People want to be desired. People want to fall in love. They also fall out of love, and have to pretend. And these interactions of men falling in love with courtesans, but maybe also finding them clingy, or they're tired of them. It's just human nature. So I'm glad that you found that very realistic.
It was, and it was very interesting to read it because, like when you think of historical novel with a romance in it, you tend to have this trope, image of, oh, they're going to fall madly in love. But I think your depiction of the relationship was much more, realistic. It seemed more true to what really happened at the time, instead of being like a romantic fantasy or something like that. But you're also writing about this time in Korean history that is very fraught, to say the least. And it still affects so many issues in Korean life, and whether it is political or diplomatic or cultural. So I was wondering, do you think you could have written this book in Korean if you were in Korea?
So what's amazing, what was very flattering to me was that it almost instantly sold to Tazan Books. Korean rights sold very quickly. And I read they got in touch with me. I do work with them, with the Korean editor directly, because I have the ability to do it. There's no reason not to. And their comment was that this feels so like truly Korean. And so I felt very validated. It was very important to me to get that affirmation from Koreans who are living in Korea. I do understand what you mean by this. Korea is extremely polarized. I don't know if every audience member right now will know what I'm talking about, but Korea is a very politically divided society. And I think that there are elements of this book that will maybe anger some people, maybe anger some conservatives, political conservatives, because it seems to imply that the US did not play a completely salubrious role in the development of modern Korea. And it does bring up a lot of revolutionaries who have more socialist tendencies. It's gonna feel like a political statement in Korea, I think, in ways that I did not intend. What people need to recognize that I'm a Korean American writing in English. And for me, one of the things that I was interested in revealing was what was the American role in these political situations that reverberate today, even in the Philippines or Pacific Islands. The US has nuclear bases in these peaceful Pacific Islands, and it has real consequences for the people and ecosystems today. The Korea is a divided country today with US military presence. Why? And US is a country that gave me so many opportunities. Don't get me wrong. I owe my loyalty to the US for sure. But with that, I also think it's important to recognize that that these realities are there, that we need to learn about history. And I really was interested in uncovering that. And in terms of the revolutionaries, I also think it's natural that it's actually historically accurate that people at that time, before a lot of the negatives of communism were exposed, it was the idealists who really fought hard for the independence movement, naturally, because they were going to fight for freedom and independence, and they were also going to fight for justice. And I do mention some of the inconsistencies of that ideology as well. In very, very brief sentence, I mentioned that they joined the Bolsheviks, but then the Bolsheviks eventually asked them to disband, asked the Independence Army to disband, and when they did not, they shot all the remaining Korean independence fighters. So It's both. They were getting shot at left and right, literally from the left and from the right. And I tried to kind of paint that whole picture without overloading it with historical facts, just because I'm afraid of stepping on toes. I'm just going to say that this is a fictional novel and I had to pick a point of view and go with it. Otherwise, it just becomes too baggy.
Well, also, you're telling the stories of these people's lives in a way. It's not supposed to be a political statement. It's, sort of imagining what their life could have been and would have been like. But you also bring up, it's interesting point that you're writing about Koreans, and there are some Japanese people in your book too, but they didn't speak English, but you're writing in English. So a lot of proper nouns, some of the names, certain obviously locations, or even the names of the character, they can sound very unfamiliar to the English speakers. So as some of the words remain in Korean, but a lot of them are translated. And I think you did a really great job of explaining what that is without, trying to be too, explanatory about it. But even the names of the characters like Jade and Lotus, obviously I can see where you got those names translated from, but then Jongho and Hanchul, they have the Korean sounding name. So how did you choose to use the English language to tell this Korean story? And how did you keep this balance between the two languages?
So first of all, I have translated. I translated the late great Choi In-ho, who is one of 20th century's great Korean authors, and I loved one of his short stories. Translated it, asked my editor at Granta to take a look. He liked it, and it got published. And it was one of the great satisfactions for me as an artist to be able to do that for a work that I believe in, whether or not I wrote it. But I am an English writer. I don't write in Korean. I suppose I could. If I read a lot in Korean language, I do start to absorb it, and the pace, the lyricism gets into my head until I can sort of imagine myself writing in it too, because I start to think more in Korean. But so it was never a question of whether, which language am I going to write in. English is the most comfortable language for me for writing. But I actually didn't feel much of a barrier in terms of using English to depict Korean culture. And I think it's because I am such a big fan of world literature. Some of my biggest literary influences are the Russian greats. And I love reading the Russian greats. I don't know Russian. I only read them in English, but I don't feel that much has been lost because it feels really, really good. Even the lyricism of the language in good translations, it just stays alive, even though I have no idea what that might sound like in Russian. So I knew that really it doesn't matter what culture you're depicting. You can do that in any language, really. But I do, however, imagine scenes in certain ways in Korean, because there is a scene in chapter 5, which is one of my favorite chapter openers. We are introduced to Sung-soo, who is this very arrogant and flaneur slash publisher. He's bourgeois, well-educated. And he is kind of, waking up, feeling very good about himself, going to his publishing office, and then his friend from Shanghai visits from his student days in Tokyo. And then they meet each other and they greet each other. How long has it been? How long? How long? And people don't greet each other that way, really, in English. They greet each other that way in Korean, though. 얼마나 오랜만이야, 이게.
Yeah.
너무 오랜만이잖아. So I imagine them speaking that way, and then I translate, but it doesn't sound awkward in English. You just kind of assume, that's how they greet each other, and it feels natural to me. I don't think that they would say, "How are you? I missed you."
That's a really interesting point. Thanks for telling me that. That's a really, really interesting point, because I do remember reading that part and going like, oh, so this is what she was doing. Definitely, that totally makes sense. But So you just mentioned that you translated a Korean into English. What was that process like for you, and what did you learn from that process as a writer?
Well, it was incredibly satisfying. Chae In-ho is somebody I've admired since I was a little girl, and I read his books. He wrote children's literature as well, and the short story I translated was actually a fable, really a children's tale for adults fable, and it was it was a big learning experience, but I also felt that it was meant to happen in a way. I don't know that I'm going to continue to translate, but how it happened was I was going to go to France for 3 months to just cool off because I had burned out of living in New York. And I was actually very upset because I felt like I wasn't getting anywhere with my writing, and I was in my late 20s, and I was getting sick a lot because I was writing from 10 p.m. until 2 a.m. and then 5 a.m. to 7 a.m. before going into full-time job. And I lived in a fifth floor walk-up, and I got bitten by mosquitoes all the time because I didn't have an insect screen. It was just horrible. My life in New York towards the end got really unbearable.
I'm sorry.
I'm telling these very New York specific stories because I know you guys are based there, and I think it might cause some people to go, yeah, that's bad. So I decided to quit my job, well-paying job, and park all my stuff in my parents' house in Portland and just book a one-way ticket to France, really discouraged about the fact that I hadn't published a book yet. And I had this idea, maybe I should swing by London and meet my editor. And then I was like, there's nothing really I want to pitch to him in terms of short stories, but I ran into Chae In-ho's book while I was staying at my parents for Christmas. And I thought, and I read it again and I cried, and I thought, what if I just translated one of these things and pitched it to Luke? And Luke and I hadn't talked in 2 years. And I emailed him, I said, can I come get coffee with you? And he said, sure. And we walked into his office, and I saw a little postcard of one of Hangang's books, because Granta is the publisher for Hangang in the UK. So we kind of got started talking about Korean authors that I admire. And he was like, who do you think I should be reading? And I said, well, there's this guy. He's dead now. He passed away in 2015, but he's one of my favorites. And he was like, okay, translate and send it to me sometime. And I got out of that meeting. I thought about bringing that book with me to France because I thought that this might happen. But I called my mom and I was like, you need to scan those pages now. And so she scanned it to me. And as soon as I landed in France, like after like so many hours of traveling, I went to a small city called Grenoble. I like took off all my coat and scarves. And the first thing I did, I'm like first time in France, or not the first time, but I just landed in France. I don't even have any food in the fridge. And I just start translating. And for 24 hours, I didn't get out of the Airbnb, and I finished the translation. And I submitted it to Luke, and he was like, okay, this is really good. I like it a lot. So the moral of that story is, I think sometimes you kind of have a spark of inspiration, like this is what you should do. If you have the will and the drive, do it. And you need to take that risk and kind of go for it. And that's what I learned from that experience.
That's a great story. And also, thank you so much for telling us a little bit about yourself too, because this is your first novel. So for many of our viewers, probably this is their first chance to get to know you. And we mentioned throughout this talk a little bit about, your family and your, schools and your career, your life in New York. But also, I wanted to ask you the fact that you came to the States at the age of 9, mm-hmm. which is an interesting age because you're not quite a baby, but you're not even a teen yet. And it's that very delicate age, I think. And I'm pretty sure you are very bright, precocious child. I have this feeling that you may have been when you were little. But then you come to the States, probably you didn't know English. You probably, I think I read somewhere that you had to learn how to read all over again at the age of 9. What was that experience like for you? And do you think, how do you think that made you relate to language?
So that's a really great question, Jay. And I didn't know any English when I came here at 9. I pretty much started from the alphabet. And it is actually rather unusual that my parents didn't teach me English as a grade schooler in Korea, because in Korea, extracurricular learning is very popular, but I didn't do any of that. And I came here and I was learning from books that were for 2-3-year-old babies in 4th grade. And there were so many traumatic experiences where like they would tell us that it's no school the next day, but we wouldn't understand. So we would drive all the way to school and then we'd find out the school's closed. I mean, these things happened on a constant basis. It was very humiliating. And what was terrible was everyone had told me Juhea is extremely bright from a very early age. I actually taught myself to read and write Korean when I was 2. And that's when my older sister was in 1st grade, and they realized, wait a minute, Juhea's stealing her sister's books and kind of teaching herself. So everybody thought that I was very linguistically gifted. But however, when I got to the US and they dropped me in 4th grade, I didn't immediately pick things up. For basically about 1 to 1.5 years, I was completely deaf and blind. It just was, I basically knew how to get to the bathroom at school. And it was a real self-esteem destroyer. And when I started actually learning the language and being able to follow the class, that made me realize language is power. Like, language is agency. Without language, you don't have any power. And it became a source of great pride for me to use language in the best way that it can be used. And then, once you have 2 languages at your disposal, you realize language really shapes values. Because I realized I don't want to fight with my sister in Korean anymore. It's fighting with her is much more advantageous to me if I can fight with her in English, because she's my older sister. That's just one childish example, but you're starting to realize there are different things that are emphasized. Korea emphasizes integrity. I think integrity is a huge value in Korean culture. Loyalty, warmth, and affection, and of course, hierarchy. Those things are shaped by the language itself. In English is a hugely rational language. It's the international language of science for a good reason. It's very easy to learn, even though I didn't do a good job of it.
Obviously, you did fine.
Eventually. And my other language is French. And with French, it also opened up another side of me that wasn't available to me before. And I think French is incredibly poetic. And it is really a very romantic language. And it's kind of loosey-goosey. You can swap the order of words a lot more than in English, I feel. And they even like turning it upside down. So they, for example, if a party in French is fête, but in slang they would call it teuf. They do that a lot. It's really funny. And so they are kind of inventive, kind of clever, but also just super emotive, and prizes beauty a lot. But I am so glad for Korean. The fact that I kept Korean was not just useful because I could write this book and say I am a real Korean person, take me seriously, but because I think my values wouldn't be the same if I didn't speak Korean. And it's the values that made this book what it is, because I think that way. So
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So speaking of the values, this book, the beasts, well, there are many beasts, I said, but one of the most beautiful scene is the beginning scene about the hunting, when the hunter is about to freeze to death, and then he is sort of the encounters with the magnificent tiger. And then one of the saddest, you kind of mentioned it at the end, is at the end of the war at the zoo, where they decide to kill all the animals because they couldn't afford to feed them. I'm not giving anything away, so I can mention that detail.
Well, now we know that the animals died.
They're hunters, so, and guns. But and you also have this beautiful, beautiful cover with the beautiful the Korean tiger, the Siberian tiger, and your description of the beast is almost mythical. This mythical figure that is really part of the Korean psyche, almost. The way you describe the animal. And I want to also mention that you are donating a portion of the proceeds from your book to the Phoenix Fund, which I read is a Siberian tiger and Amur leopard conservation nonprofit based in Vladivostok, Russia. And for anybody who's watching who does not know, that Korean tigers, the Siberian tigers, actually in the Korean peninsula, they are thought to be extinct. So can you tell us a little bit about what this magnificent beast means to you? And also tell us a little bit about this organization that you decide to so generously support.
So I love this question. Thank you so much for asking this.
Sure.
So I read a lot as a young child in Korea, and the stories that I really cut my teeth on are Korean folklores. And as you, I'm sure, know, Jay, Korean folklores are predominated by this beast, the tiger. Actually, as a matter of fact, Korean peninsula had more leopards because they're smaller predators. But the stories are all about the tigers. They were just on another level of obsession for the Korean people. And even though they had real casualties from the tiger, from having so many great beasts in a tiny little mountainous land, they also revered them. They also loved them. You can tell from the stories where the tigers are so, they're sometimes vicious, but also oftentimes very funny. They're stupid, they're smart and cunning, and they're merciful, and they're courageous. So they have all of these qualities that make them our cousins, essentially, and our spiritual cousins. So I believe my love of nature really sprang from reading these stories as a little kid, which is unbelievable because I continue to be obsessed with nature and animals just from reading these stories as a little girl. And I'm glad that you say that you can really tell that the tiger is a mythical figure, because it's as though it crossed over from that mythical folkloric land into this novel. And then its disappearance, of course, towards the end, it does have significance, that is symbolic. And I really wanted this to have some kind of benefit to the world, aside from me just becoming an author. I got so many rejections in my writing career, and this is normal. If anybody says that they didn't get rejections, they're extremely a rarity or lying. But I got rejected a lot, and when I was despondent, I realized the only way I can keep going is if I knew why. And I realized I don't want to just become a writer because I want to see my name on the cover of a book and feel fancy about myself. My own personal life does feel kind of meaningless to me in the grand scheme of things, but I do think that being an author is an important responsibility as an artist to make the world a better place, as corny as that sounds. But I really do truly believe it. And so once I realized why I was writing, and it's really to save nature and reduce animal suffering, it made all the rejections okay. And it makes success okay too, but it makes the rejections go by a lot better. And I contacted a couple different organizations about tiger conservation. And the reason I chose the Phoenix Fund is they were easy to work with. And it's not always easy to work with Russia-based organizations. but we were able to overcome our difference in geography. And they focus on two different aspects. They do arts education. So they reach out to children and teach them how to love and protect nature. They do a lot of arts contests like coloring or painting or literature. They do a lot of readings for the children. These are all methods that I personally became acquainted with nature because I was a girl growing up in Incheon, which is a very urban area. I didn't personally meet any tigers growing up. I didn't really have access to nature on a day-to-day basis, but because I was reading stories, I felt like it was right there next to me. So these people, Phoenix Fund in Vladivostok is doing that to the children, which in turn goes up to their parents, which is important because it's an impoverished area. So if we want the parents not to poach tigers or their prey animals, it's important to get through them with the kids. If the kids really love the tigers and nature, then the parents kind of absorb it as well. So I thought how they do that was very, very cool. And they also support the rangers. The rangers are paid very poorly, which at times makes them unreliable. They might not really do the anti-poaching thing very effectively if they're being paid so poorly, and they can be bribed by the poachers. So what they're doing is to motivate them, incentivize them, and come up with also technological advances where we can keep track of their work more accurately. So I felt that those were really important things to do. And what's interesting is that a lot of Korean tourists nowadays come to Vladivostok, and the Phoenix Fund told me that these tourists come to their office and they knock on their door and say, we love tigers. We support the work that you do. Like, how do we donate? How do we participate in it? And they were really thankful. And they took the time to talk about, reintroduction possibly of the tiger in the Korean Peninsula. And that's very exciting for me to hear. They know how to talk to donors, but they were also very honest because they said, as much as we would like to see the tiger cross over to the North Korean border, and that's an entirely within the realm of possibility, because to tigers, they don't care about country borders. They just want to go where the food is. The problem is in North Korea, the forests are not, they're completely, so there's not enough food there. If North Korea were living standards were raised and the forests are not stripped bare by hungry people, then yeah, the tiger could move over. But these are very interesting things to be talking about. And they're asking for support with 20, 30, 50 years out, not just 1, 2, 3, 4 years out. And I hope that this does interest you guys. If you guys want to learn more about the Phoenix Fund, go ahead and check out their website. And of course, buying a book is going to also benefit them.
Help them too. Yeah, no, that's fascinating. And I mean, just like everything else in life, but it's another thing that you think of, save the tigers, but there are all these such complicated issues. So thank you so much for telling us about that organization. But you talked about rejections and you talked about not being fulfilled, but you are now a published author. You have your first book out. Not only that, we had somebody ask question if the book is translated into Korean, and yes, as you mentioned earlier, it is translated and it will be published next year, I believe, in Korean.
Yes.
As well as it has sold in many international markets, and it will be published in Great Britain and Australia and all these other places. So first of all, how do you feel about Koreans reading this book?
I'm really honored, and that's the best compliment. Actually, one of the I as like a nerd, I read every Goodreads review. I'm sorry for saying this. I know it makes me sound deeply uncool, but I do. I'm not above it. I'm a debut novelist. I'm very excited to hear reader feedback.
You should be, absolutely. Yes.
One of my favorite moments was this Korean young lady who read this and said, "This is such a deeply Korean book, and I am so impressed by how well it understands and represents our culture." And that is the biggest compliment, because when I sometimes read books by Korean American authors, I do sense some inaccuracies, like even in simple linguistic things. And I'm like, wait a minute, so you really, no one caught this. And, I obviously feel an immense pride in representing our culture well, from the cover, which I had a lot of hand in, to what's inside. So
yeah. And then, for non-Korean readers, I think, as you said, some of the advanced reviews by non-Korean readers, they've been praising you for showing them this world, the part of history many non-Koreans were not familiar with. So what do you want your readers to take away from your book?
I've said this before, and I will say this again. I didn't write this book to be a nice, fun, fictional way to teach Americans what happened in Korea 100 years ago. This is not a history light. It's a work of art, and a work of art, it primarily concerns itself with what does it mean to be human. And for me, this really asks the question of what are we willing to live and die for? And these people were making these choices during a very dangerous time. But I don't think that the issues that they were struggling against are over now. If anything, we're really living in a world that's even more imperiled than ever. And I hope that this book inspires people to think, what kind of choices am I making now in this world? I think we hear that from Sung-soo and Myungbo especially, thinking inside his head, the world is burning up and all these people, all they care about is just making a little bit more money and finding a job. And, that's very relevant to today. So I hope that this inspires people to think about their lives and how to live more meaningfully.
Absolutely. And I'm sorry to ask you because your book just got published today, but we want to hear more from you. So what's next? What are you thinking of writing? Or are you in the process of writing?
I mean, yes, I am always in the process of writing. I think that's the best policy. And my next book is going to be a ballet novel. And that's nothing to do with Korea or even history. It's going to be modern. And I'm a huge ballet tomate. And it's another subject that I can really immerse myself in for several years without getting sick of it. I think that's important. If any aspiring novelists are out there, I really think you should choose whatever it is, but you should really, that should be your life for the next 5 years. So whatever it is that you're obsessed about, go after that.
I think that's a great advice to anybody out there who might be interested in writing on their own book. And we could go on, but first of all, congratulations. And we wish you all the best with your first book and everything else that's going to come afterwards. And thanks to Peter, our IT director, for making this live webcast a possibility. And thanks to Juhea, the Arts and Culture Officer, for all her work. And we would like to thank you, our members and viewers, for joining us tonight. Beasts of Little Land is available wherever books are sold, but on our website, there is a link to purchase the book from your neighborhood independent store. So that might be an option for you. And as you heard, part of the proceeds will go actually help out the tigers. So please check out our website for the link and all the other information about this book, as well as our upcoming programs. Make sure you subscribe our YouTube channel so you don't miss any other upcoming programs. Thank you, Juhea. We wish you all the best.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Good night.